Welcome back to News Talk. I'm Bruce DuPoit. There's a new twist to an election cycle that has already seen more than its share of unusual events. We're talking about that partnership between GOP rivals Ted Cruz and John Kasich to theoretically divvy up their resources in the remaining states that have primaries in a desperate, last-ditch effort to stop Donald Trump. For his part, Mr. Trump is calling this collusion and an act of desperation. Politico reporter Daniel Lippman joins us now. He's co-author with Mike Allen of the widely read Politico Playbook. Good to have you back. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
I, like the rest of the world, got an email from the Kasich campaign Sunday night saying, we're going to fight here, Cruz is going to fight there, and we're sort of joining forces. Not that we don't continue to be rivals, but there's one thing that unites us. We need to take down frontrunner Donald Trump for either of us to prevail. And I thought to myself, this is, I mean, I've been following politics a long time. I've never seen anything like this, at least not publicly. Who knows, you know, you never find out everything that happens behind the scenes in politics. But for this to be so out there, and so for the candidates to be so upfront about what they're doing is quite striking.
Yeah, it reminds me of, you know, when every so often you hear about Democrats trying to interfere in Republican primaries and trying to stir up the pot there. You know, I think it just shows the desperation of the other candidates because they've tried everything to stop Donald Trump, and yet he still has, you know, been prevailing in primaries. He's actually adopted a new nickname for John Kasich, 1 for 38 or 1 for 41, saying, you know, he's only won Ohio, and so this loser has, you know, why is he still in the race? And so I think it indicates that they're down to the last straws because they know that Trump is, you know, the hands-on, the betting game's favorite to be the GOP nominee and get the number of delegates he needs for Cleveland.
There are a lot of questions about how well thought out and how well coordinated this deal between Cruz and Kasich is, and we'll talk about that in a second. How was it supposed to work? What was the notion, at least at the very outset? So
the notion was that you know, John Kasich would focus on states where, you know, which were more moderate, that he could see a path to, you know, deny Trump victory in those states, or at least keep his margins down, and then let Ted Cruz compete in the very conservative states where he does really well in, like Indiana. That has already started to fray, whereby both, you know, John Kasich said he still wants his voters to vote for him in Indiana, and, you know, Cruz had to defend this partnership. And what's interesting is that the candidates haven't even discussed it among themselves. It was their campaign managers, you know, making this deal, and so it almost feels like they feel less bound by it because they haven't even shook hands on it in a formal way. And so that was the hope, and it doesn't seem to be, you know, it's like those ceasefires you hear about in wars. They just keep fighting.
And it was remarkable how the thing seemed to come apart right out of the gate. For this to work, all the anti-Trump vote has to go to Cruz or to Kasich. If they continue to split it up, 45, 30, 20, and, you know, whatever is remainder going wherever, it doesn't stop Donald Trump. There needs to be a true coalescing, meaning don't advertise on the airwaves, don't do lit, don't campaign in whatever states. You take some, I'll take some. As long as we keep Trump shy of 1237, the theory goes, heading into Cleveland, it's game on for those of us not named Trump.
And what's interesting is that what the candidates and the campaigns have not factored in, or they not fully, is that a lot of the second choice for the Cruz and the Kasich voters, that's Donald Trump. And so if you say, if you tell the Ted Cruz voters in Oregon and New Mexico, those two states that they said that John Kasich would be, you know, compete in, a lot of those people will go to Trump, and so that could even help him. And, you know, because then it's a two-man race between Trump and whoever his rival is in all the states, and so that's not what they want. And so, and it also gives what you talked about earlier, the collusion factor. Now he's going to say that they're still trying to steal the nomination, and they're doing it in plain sight.
So there's this sense that they didn't have as solid deal as they thought, that it wasn't as coordinated and well put together, that the execution is flawed, and so it may not work just on that basis alone. And on top of that, there are the optics, which are pretty negative. This could end up, theoretically, being a net loss for Cruz and Kasich, couldn't it?
That's definitely possible. But what else do they have going for them? So they're just trying to throw paint against the wall. The one interesting point I would make is that as much as Trump says it's anti-democratic, all their shenanigans to try to stop him from getting the 1237 delegates, this is not supposed to be a full democracy. You're electing delegates. You still have to play by the rules. It's a private, even though the Republican Party is a huge party, it's one of the national parties, it's still a private organization, so they can pick their rules or whatever they want. And so it's not supposed to be completely, one vote equals one vote.
Can you talk about the Donald Trump that we've seen on the campaign trail in the last 24 hours with all this talk from his new, theoretically in-command guy on the inside, party veteran Paul Manafort, that Donald Trump has been doing sort of a bit, an act, and he's going to pivot to a new act, a more presidential one. The guy we saw on the campaign trail seemed to be rebuffing that notion as robustly as he could, because there was it was the riffing Donald Trump, it was the winging at Donald Trump, it was the mocking John Kasich for his eating mannerisms or whatever. The nicknaming was in full effect. So given what the expectation might have been for Trump now and going forward, something very different on the campaign trail over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, he's even said that his son basically eats better in a more dignified, respectful manner than John Kasich. And, he said, have you ever seen a person just shove food into his mouth like Kasich? And so it's back to the old guy on the stand-up routine. And what's interesting about that is that it seems like Trump is, when someone says, you should be more presidential, he says, thank you for that advice, but I actually want to do what made me successful in the first place, and so don't tell me what to do. And so you're seeing the old campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, get more power. So it's kind of a shifting ebb and flow there's a big competition between Corey Lewandowski and Paul Manafort. It's almost a war inside the campaign with both. There's two sides to who can get Donald Trump's ear and tell him what to do and how to speak. And
this is a very common thing that happens in campaigns and has been happening in campaigns ever since there have been campaigns. But what's fascinating always about this process is that it gives you a sense. Campaigns are large, sprawling, chaotic organizations at a time when the candidate doesn't always get to control events as he or she would like. Well, guess what? That's what the White House would be like. So the danger, I think, in this moment for Trump is that people will look at the warring factions within his campaign, the sense that he's with one guy one day, it's the original guy the next day, is that he would run a chaotic White House, right? If you care about Donald Trump making the best impression and winning the ultimate prize, you've got to be concerned about the optics of this moment.
Yeah, he promised yesterday that he wouldn't tweet as president, which is kind of funny because I think journalists would rebel. They'd say this is cruel and unusual treatment, and we need our tweeting President Trump. But that's a great point about how you would act, because how you run a campaign, that it often has some lessons about how you'll run the White House. And for Trump himself, he's still facing a lot of questions about, are Americans comfortable with him with the nuclear, launch codes? And there's this big story in Huffington Post today about how the military, they've never seen a candidate with less respect for the military. He trashed John McCain as being a war hero. And so that's another big concern, whether you would see some in the military, with the real concerns about Trump.
Reporter Daniel Lippman of Politico joining us today here on the program. Always good to have you here. Thanks very much for coming back, being with us today. We'll step aside here. Local news, front and center next as we continue here on News Talk. Don't go away.